Good afternoon, everyone. Welcoming everyone to Virtual Thought Leadership, Top Trends Shaping the Asian Solar Market in 2020. I'm Sangeeta Sridhar from Solar Quarter, Asia's largest clean tech media firm. I would be quickly taking you all to today's agenda. We have, as you can see, we have latest trends shared by eminent leaders from the industry from the ASEAN region, followed by a Q&A session in the end for 10 minutes. I would be quickly launching a poll to understand the category of audience that we have today. I'm closing the poll now. So we have a mixed category of audience today, but majorly from consulting firm, energy consumers, industry body, IPPs, and OEMs. Thank you very much. I'll be quickly launching one more poll. Do you think ASEAN region will be able to achieve its target of 23% RE in the region energy mix by 2025? I'm closing the poll now. So 64% of audience agree with us. With this, I'll end the polls now, and I hand over the session to Ms. Sonia Roy, Rao, who is an Associate Director in Capital Projects and Infrastructure, PwC, who would be talking on market research presentation on trends in Asian solar market by 2020. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Sangeeta. Thank you for inviting me to this webinar and to be a presenter here. And I'm glad to be the first one to present here. I feel really privileged that we have all these esteemed panelists with us who have a real good specialization in the sector of solar energy and ASEAN, and we get to hear from everyone. The panelists will also share their views later as we go, but I'm happy to start off with a talk on the trends that we see in the solar sector in ASEAN. By way of a brief introduction, my name is Soumya, and I work in PwC, Singapore, in the Capital Projects and Infrastructure team. The capital projects and infrastructure practice globally is around 1,200 professional staff around the world, and we advise the private and public sector on infrastructure transactions, be it advising government on delivering infra, the commercial structures, or advising the private sector on bidding for these projects, funding, financing, or helping them with their problems in both greenfield and brownfield infra. We focus on transport and utilities more in the region, given the need, the basic need of these sectors in the region. And of late, I've had more of a focus on renewable energy as well. So I'm happy to share some views on that as we go. Let me just put up my screen here.
We are able to see your screen now.
Are you all able to see it in full screen, or?
Can you please make it full screen?
Okay, is that better?
Perfect. Thank you.
So the renewable energy transition in the world is here to stay. If you look at the BNEF, New Energy Outlook issued in 2019, which forecast all the way to 2050 for Southeast Asia, there's a view that BNEF have that the power demand will be pushed up. Sorry, I'm just trying to minimize the screen. Just give me a minute.
I'll do it for you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Is it better now?
Yeah, I think slightly better. So basically the power demand will be pushed up due to GDP growth as well as population growth. And there in Southeast Asia, there's large demand for air conditioning, and this will be the largest contributor to this power demand growth. So the power system really has to gear up and grow really sixfold. And a lot of this growth in the power system is expected by BNEF to be with solar PV capacity additions. The module costs have fallen drastically, and there's a large reduction expected even in the future. Apart from that, of course, we have all the technical efficiencies coming into the system, which make the overall project more viable. So by 2050, 58% of renewable is expected to be in the energy mix compared to the current 84% of fossil fuel. I mean, this is a future that I'm really looking forward to, and glad to be able to contribute to as well. The renewable energy potential in ASEAN is high, especially for solar, with the irradiation in our region. And you can see that here in the chart. However, each of the countries have their own challenge, some quite unique. Singapore is highly urbanized environment, and in Singapore which is where I live, we do have a lot of land constraints. On the other hand, Laos, with highly mountainous land, they have other types of constraint on how do you build land-mounted solar. As we know, thanks to the technological development in the solar sector over decades, we can now actually see the rapid energy transition. And we not only have cheaper solutions to deploy for land-based, more efficient systems, but also have innovations to help develop alternate technologies in land-challenged environments. And floating solar on reservoirs near hydro projects, rooftop solar, solar on street lamps, potentially on roads, I don't know. There could be a lot of potential. And Singapore, for one, is really putting a lot of backing to research into the various types of technologies that can be tested, especially in this environment of highly urbanized, built-up environment. So in the future, there could be building facades with solar panels. The future is yet to come. In building the real economic case for renewable energy, the key factors that drive this, and when I say economic case, it's really whether investors will be interested to develop projects in a particular country. The key factors that drive it is like market potential and corporate potential. What are the targets set by the government? How is the current installed capacity compared to that? What kind of corporate activism do you see in these countries where the corporates want to see the color of the electricity they procure? The procurement models followed by the government is quite important as well. Is there a feed-in tariff regime that incentivizes more projects? Also, the transparency of the processes run by the government. So we do a lot of advisory with governments on this. The policy regulatory support for corporate PPA, carbon tax, market for renewable energy certificates, all these also foster and help develop the market. The costs and revenue definitely are contributors. And that's where the local incentives on tax and all other such factors will also help. The tariff trends and tariff regimes, procurement models, you'll see Vietnam as a classic case of how they approach the rollout of renewable energy with the feed-in tariff scheme. Of course, it came with its own set of challenges. The financing options available is another interesting one. We see the lending market opening up even to financing corporate PPA portfolios. you'd see the recent financing by ING of Cleantech Solar's portfolio, which includes regional assets, and that's a good example. Ayala Corporation Energy, AC Energy, also raised green bonds. At the same time, there are challenges to raise project financing in markets where PPA has bankability issues, or the developer has to bear merchant risks. Another mode of financing we also see is EPC financing, and that helps projects kind of move in the interim while working in the challenging environments in the region. The key considerations for solar projects, as you know, is land is quite essential. With a lot of countries may not assign land for this. Like, for example, currently we're looking at the solar tender in Myanmar, which is looking at 1 gigawatt of projects across different parts in the country. And what's happening in Myanmar is a big rush now to try to get the right land, because the government's asked the private sector to go find their land and bid for it. And all this has to happen in a very short timeline. So land procurement is necessary and an issue. With the increasing size of projects, the ability of local banks to finance projects may be challenged. Hence, it's important for various governments in ASEAN to consider the bankability of PPAs from an international financing lender's point of view. And this is something that we are slowly seeing being recognized. Offtake security is another important point for governments to consider, as to, does the developer have offtake security on the project? And this may be in various forms. But we've seen some projects where the government expects that the private sector start construction even before a PPA is in place. So this may be challenging, especially for the international investors who are not familiar with the local government's ways of working. And so we need more governments to recognize this if they're interested in solar development and support by improving these conditions. Of course, another one is curtailment risk. So to manage this, the government needs to also look at, and there is considerations on this in the region now by various governments on how do you manage the grid condition and improve the grid stability. We are seeing more governments investing in this. At the same time, looking at other options like decentralized generation or a more planned development rollout, like substation-based bidding, solar farm auctions, and even other solutions like maybe modifying the regulatory regime to allow for more direct PPAs. So some of these trends that we're seeing will definitely affect and address these issues and bring slowly more comfort to developers and investors to invest in this sector in the region. Like I said, I work in broader infrastructure sector, and we can't go through a presentation in today's environment without talking about COVID. So COVID's affected investors' outlook and appetite in various sectors, especially where there's high demand risk like airports. But if you look at renewable energy, it's still a huge sector of interest for investors, and that'll continue to grow. With COVID, the government locally are also looking at stimulus packages apart from bailout packages, and these stimulus packages do consider renewable energy. So Malaysia has opened a tender for a 1.4 gigawatt solar project this year, and that will bring in a whole lot of investments. Similarly, Myanmar, under the COVID-19 economic relief plan, have planned the 1 gigawatt tender, which is the first ever tender across 30 ground-mounted projects. So we do see a recognition by government of the COVID environment and the stimulus packages that they're bringing in with a focus on renewable energy. If you had asked me about this maybe 3 months ago when COVID just started, I would say I'd not really expected this to come out so soon. So I would say it's a positive change. At the same time, there are restrictions within both of these solar tenders that may restrict the most competitive environment in these tenders. Like a lot of the international investors may not be able to bid for these projects given the challenges in there. So they could have been structured better, but it's a start. And it's a commitment to the energy transition in the region. Apart from government pushing for these projects, there's a rapid shift away from traditional energy source and focus of corporates towards renewable energy. And like I mentioned before, they want to see the color of the energy that they're buying. So there's an increase in corporate PPAs. In Singapore, we've seen Microsoft, Facebook enter into long-term agreements, as well as Vietnam's looking at entering into this as well. And there's a pilot rollout planned. Of course, for other countries like Cambodia that are looking to increase their appeal for manufacturing investments, there are large multinationals who have RE100 commitments, who are looking for these countries to show some demonstrable progress in bringing renewable energy into the energy mix. And there will be increasing pressure on these countries that are looking to increase their manufacturing. If they want to attract strong global multinationals, then they'll have to show the pathway to energy transition and the ability to allow these corporates and manufacturing establishments to purchase the right kind of power that they're looking for. So a lot of these countries may be looking at moving away from the single buyer system that are currently in place, and the corporate PPAs is driving it. And this is really from the active corporate buyers that prefer to purchase their power themselves. In the region, different countries have different kind of capacities. We've seen Vietnam really go up quite quickly in the last few years with the solid rollout of program and the feed-in tariff regime. However, they have their own challenges. But they do also have strong commitment to further development of solar. But this time, they are considering different options. And we'll wait to see what finally comes out. But yeah, it's potentially going to be an auction-based, substation-based, or solar park-based option system. And probably a few floating solar projects as well in the mix there. We do have targets across different countries like Myanmar, Thailand, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia. Having said that, all these targets need to kind of be supported by stronger policies and changes in the regulatory regime to actually allow these countries, foreign investors to come in, allow these countries to actually meet their targets. So there needs to be more action, and there's slow recognition of this, but surely moving in the right direction. In ASEAN, overall, to summarize the trends, we're probably looking at, based on the discussion earlier, more rooftop solar on HDB rooftops in Singapore, floating solar, corporate PPAs, and probably more of these. I'm not a technical expert, but I'm sure Jeremy, who's coming up next, will have a lot more to talk about floating solar and other forms of technologies that are coming in. In Vietnam, we could see more of corporate PPA, direct PPAs coming in, and like I mentioned, the renewable auction, floating solar, as well as secondary market transactions of operating assets, where the local developers are looking for to monetize their current assets, at the same time use the monetization to actually develop more projects. So the local developers are coming up with a vision of being long-term renewable energy developers. So this kind of energy transition does not just help the international players who are very experienced at it, but also can help grow the local economy and the local sector on the construction side. In Myanmar, with the 1 gigawatt solar tender and the substation-based bidding, for which tenders are due to close next week, we all keep our fingers crossed to see how that goes. But again, it's a bit of a challenging environment, given that it's COVID situation, and the private sector had 1 month initially to bid for it, along with land, another month of extension now for bid submission. But apart from this, mini-grid, off-grid solutions have also been seen in Myanmar, and we'll definitely see a lot more of these smart power solutions to help rural electrification. I think I've broadly covered this, and all the esteemed panelists who come after will also cover this in a lot more detail. So maybe Sangeeta, I'll end my presentation here and hand over and invite Jeremy Ong, who's from DNVGL and head of Asia Pac for Solar for DNVGL. PwC recently worked with DNVGL on the floating solar project, and that's why I work very closely with Jeremy. So Jeremy, over to you for your expertise on floating solar in ASEAN.
Thank you very much, Sonia.
I would like to interrupt in between. Before Mr. Jeremy goes ahead, I would be quickly launching a poll.
All right. Can I also request you to stop my screen? Somehow I will not able to pick that up. Thank you.
ASEAN is becoming a renewable energy hub with increased deployment, innovation, and investments. I'm closing the poll now. So 90% of attendees agree with it. Okay, now I hand over the session to Mr. Jeremy. All yours.
Thank you very much, Sangeeta, and thank you very much, Sonia, for starting off this afternoon's discussion. Today I will share my screen on trends of floating solar market in the region. Okay. I hope this is going through fine.
It's visible. Can you please make it full screen?
Yes. Okay. So, as an introduction, my name is Jeremy Ong. I'm actually the APAC head of solar for DNVGL, and APAC covering from everything from India all the way east to Australia and the Pacific. As you can see, so we have a team of, or teams of 40 people who are dedicated to solar in the region, based out from India, Singapore, China, Australia, Japan, Taiwan, Korea. So quite well spread out, and we cover everything solar related, mainly doing with due diligence and owners and engineers work, as well as independent engineers work. This is a slide that I would like to maybe just share to kick us off today, because I think the solar market that we're seeing today is very different from what it was when I started out 12 years ago. It was 7 gigawatts at most. Now, last year in 2019, it was close to 120 gigawatts. So it is a very big growth and jump. As you can see, China is taking a very big spot of 30 gigawatts last year. This other slide is actually showing a trend on the left, where you have last year's total installations from the top 10 markets. And on the right side, the table is actually the cumulative installed capacity. What these two slides, these two tables actually show is a very strong growth in the APAC region, where it is 70% of the global market from last year, and I think total install base are close to 2/3. And as you can see here, a lot of the red highlighted segments are all in APAC, where that's really driving the growth of solar.
Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt in between, but you'll have to make your slide full screen because it's not visible to everyone.
Okay. Can you see now?
No, it's not full screen yet.
Yeah. Does it work now?
Just a minute. Yes, now it's not full screen yet.
It's a bit of a trouble. Display settings.
Can you see view over there? Up on top?
Yes.
See, if you go inside that, you can find a full screen option there. View on top.
Display settings.
Perfect.
Yes. Okay. So this other slide is actually showing what we have in Asia Pacific, and you can see here majority of the top 3 markets are actually covered in China, Japan, India. And I think this is a very important understanding of how the growth story for solar in Asia is being taken and how it's being led. Obviously, there are other smaller but growing markets. As you can see in this chart, majority is still taken by China, which is a huge chunk. Then you have Japan, India as well. In the floating PV story, which really started more than 10 years ago in the US, has slowly translated into the Asian markets very well, not as quickly as one would have expected, but Singapore really kind of led in that way in having a floating PV test bed of 1 megawatt, led by the Economic Development Board, the Public Utilities Board, and the Research Institute Service. And that started in 2016, and over the last couple of years, it's been kind of the showcase for floating PV technologies, not just in the region, but globally. I think that's been a very key milestone in development of floating PV. And it is really to try to understand, to see how to make floating PV bankable, and to look at it in a way where land scarce countries and optimizing space and water would be something that the industry can start to really embark on. Obviously, the markets in Asia where has been the largest growth in floating PV alone has been China for sure, being the largest market still globally. A lot of the evolution of floating PV, I would say, started in Japan. However, that started in probably early 2013, 14, after the tsunami happened in 2011, and they embarked on their feed-in tariff program to support PV. A lot of floating PV projects came online with that government policy in place. However, that has only been very small scale floating PV projects on small water retention ponds and lakes and reservoirs. And it has grown to, I think, a cumulative size of estimated close to 300 to 400 megawatts of capacity to date. However, China, from the other side, had I would say, a big leap forward, where they didn't go through the evolution of having many small test bits and prototypes and took a while. They were really led in the growth in the market by the key player from Sungrow, where they started very quickly to build projects as they were float manufacturers themselves, and they started 40 megawatt projects, built that, and then very soon reached 100, 150 onwards. So that really helped leapfrog the whole Chinese market that we've seen. Likewise with Korea as well, kind of floating somewhere in between Japan and China. So this has been the status, and then we soon start to see other markets start to come online, where policies are starting to be in place, where Taiwan has put in place a policy to help facilitate the growth of floating PV, where they have targeted part of the country's framework for renewables, and supporting floating PV was one of the areas in this segment. So that has been part of their key drivers to promote that due to the government policy. As you can see in this chart, it is by no means the most updated, in the sense that things move nearly every other day or week. So there's going to be definitely changes in the actual capacities installed. But what is, I think, important to understand is the trend that it's heading. Floating PV, by no means at today's situation, I would say a huge segment in the market. Is still fairly nascent and niche, in the sense that it's only about 0.5 gigawatt, 1.5 gigawatts a year in capacity, and compared to the 100 gigawatt installed capacity each year of the last 2 years we are seeing. So it is still a small percentage of 1 to 1.5%. However, I think with the strong potential of using water and connecting to hydro dams, and I think the continued need for renewable energy, this becomes a very interesting and market segment in solar. So I think this has still lots of growth potential. I would say that there are markets where we will continue to see this really take up over the next couple of years. And I say for the markets which I think hold the strongest potential, so still be Vietnam, Philippines, India, China, Taiwan, and even Indonesia. We are seeing a lot of new projects being installed. A very large project in Indonesia, 145 megawatt PPA has been signed by Mazda with the utilities, and I think very soon we will see a few more floating PV, more than 50 megawatts also coming on line in terms of tenders in Indonesia. Thailand, you also see that in the case where there was a 60 megawatt, close to 16 megawatt PP signed by EGAT. Singapore with a 60 megawatt project also with the Public Utilities Board. Vietnam as well. I think soon Philippines will also have that. So I don't have any doubt that there'll be lack of interest, but I think what we would like to see, I would like to see is better solutions from a technology standpoint, better quality in improving the design and build of floating PV solutions, and more integrated solutions, not just either in panels or float systems. I think that's where you have more efficient systems being built. And so I think this is definitely going to be more discussions, and a lot of it's still going to be continuing, I think, in Asia. and I think that because Asia is still the largest market globally, the next will be the US market, and then Europe. So Europe and India in US. So let's see how the Asian growth story continues, and I look forward to having discussions with you more on floating PV. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I'll hand it back to you, Sangeeta, for the next presenter to come on.
Thank you very much for the insight, sir. Now moving ahead, we have Ms. Chris Louis, who is a project manager, Longi Solar. She would be talking on trends towards larger wafer sizes, advantages, and limits. Over to you.
This is Chris from Longi Solar. So today I want to have a presentation about the new wafer size trend. Oh, sorry, give me a minute. Okay, let's get started. So I think in the last 5 years that the whole total market share of the solar module have already been changed by Longi, I think. So we can take a look at the market trend. So maybe 5 years ago, the market share of a mono wafer and mono modules only have less than 20%. But till now, till last year, the ratio is already raised to 68%. And in the last 4 years, Longi already launched our 4 product series from HIMO 1 to HIMO 4 with our mono part technology. This is for cell, and half cut and bifacial. This is for module technology. And last year we launched a new wafer size called M6, which has a 166 millimeter size, also with a gallium doped silicon. So now this wafer size and this module size already becomes a new benchmark for the module industry. Then I think we are the manufacturer of the module. We are the technology innovation maker, because we are not only produce these modules, but we help the solar business to lower our LCOE of energy yield. So you can see in the last 5 years, the LCOE of solar plants reduced from 5.8 cents to the current, with our bifacial technology, we can get 3.2 cents per kilowatt hour. So we can say that the innovation of the technology brought by Longi have helped the new energy industry get a very compatible cost of energy yield. So next part, let's take a look at the current major products from our company. So as I just introduced, we have our M6 wafer with our HIMO 4 module product series. We have a 60 cell size. This is for rooftop, especially for residential, for your house rooftop, and can also be installed on your commercial rooftop. And the next one, we have a HIMO 4 72 cell product. This is our most cost-effective product, mainly for the commercial rooftop and for a large ground power station. And also, this is also a very good solution for the floating solar. I think last part we talk about the market for the floating solar. So currently, the floaters. Our module is compatible with most of the floaters, And I think we can expect in the coming year, we will have more projects in Southeast Asia and South Asia. So last but not least, this is our new products from this year. We call it HYMO 5. This new technology, we will start to producing our new wafer size. We call it M10, and the size is 182. So this module is mainly for ultra large ground-mounted power station, and also you can use it on a tracker design. So I think this is a very hot topic in the module industry recently. Is that not only LONGi, we have 7 company to come to a mutual agreement that we will move to a new wafer size. We call it M10. So I think this part explains why we choose this module size. So firstly, we can say that we can find that is from the production side. So the module, so from the ingot wafer cutting to cell production and module production, this wafer size can be competitive to most of the current production line. So next one is about the reliability. So when we talking about the wafer size, so there's some discussion about is it the larger the better? I think from the module reliability side, it is not the good. This is not good because we will have a mechanical loading issue when the module grow too large. We also have a potential risk of hotspots because of the current of the module will be very high. So next part is about the system compatibility. That this M10 wafer module is compatible with most of the current central inverter. And the working current of this HYMO 5 will be less than 15 amp. And for string inverter, that's some big player of the inverter company is developing their new prototype. So we can expect it's on market. It will be on market very soon. So also the size of this new module also compatible to most of the tracker systems. So the last part, the next part is about the module transportation because we will ship the module with containers. So then the module size will be very limited by the size of the containers. So there was a detailed calculation later in the presentation I will tell you. So the last one is about the module installation because we now need 2 operators to handle the module. So this size of the module, we think we already made an optimized result. So this is part, I think this is how we get this best result for the wafer size. So let's take a look at this is the height of the containers is 2570. So we minus the margin for loading up and uploading. So we minus the height of the pallet and the package. So we get the maximum module width is 1,130 millimeter. So by this module, maximum module width, we calculated the best size of the wafer. Okay, so let's take a look at the comparison between our new product and also another, I think it's very popular product of another wafer size. So our HYMO 5 will have a major output 540 watts. This is 40 watts higher than our competitors. That means 8% more power can be generated on one module. Also, the module efficiency is higher. let's see, take a look at the cutting of the cells. We have a half-cut cells, but the another have one-third cut. That means that you will have two laser cutting on one cells, which will make extra loss caused by the cutting. So also the module pattern design, our HAMO 5 kept the very traditional module design. We try to not make very big change on the current ones. So we keep the original design. But the another one is they will, because of the width of the wafer is too large, so they have to only have 5 rows of the cells. That means the module is not symmetry anymore. So the electrical design is also asymmetric. So let's take a look at the electrical parameters. So our modules have a lower VOC. That means the string length will be larger. That means that also the BOS cost will be reduced by a lower VOC. Also for the these new products, we also invited a new smart solaring technology. This technology using new technology of ribbons. That means the ribbons outside of the module, outside of the cell, and under the cell is a different shape. This new ribbon technology also can help us to minimize the gap between cells, which can resulting in good efficiency of the module. So last part is about the BOS cost saving. So let's look at the BOS cost reduced by the module power through the larger wafers. So compared to, I think this is a major product in the market. We call it 166 wafer with 440 watts. Comparing to the, I think the major products from the 2 years ago, we call it M2 cell. That the power increased on one module can help you to reduce the BOS cost more than 1 cent per watt. So let's take a look at the system cost again. So comparing our HAMR 5 to G1 wafer with 410 watts. So we can see that the BOS cost saving will more than 1.2 cents per watt. And comparing to this around 500 watt product, the BOS cost saving was around 0.35 cents per watt on a fixed tilt and 0.7 per watt on a tracker design. This is a very detailed comparison between I think this is the market, the products, the current products on the market. So let's say how we can reduce the, we can get the lowest LCOE. You can find the detailed consumption at the bottom of this page. We set up a sample. We set up a sample project to compare our HAMR 5 series to 410 watt modules. You can see a very clear trend when you using our new modules product series. You can reduce 3.5% of the LCOE. So I think now HAMR 4 already became a very popular product in the world. That in the last year we already delivered more than 6 gigawatts to the global market. And this year, we will bring our new product, HYMO 5, to the market. So I think from the Q4 of this year, we will start to do the mass production, and we are looking forward to see its appearance on the large, ultra large projects around the world. Thank you. That's all for my presentation.
Thank you very much for the insights. Now, moving ahead, we have Mr. Devin Narang, who is an MD, Syndicatum Renewable Energy Private Limited. He would be talking on trends in floating solar and corporate PPAs in solar sector of Singapore. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sangeeta. Thank you very much. Considering that I've got a couple of minutes left because I have a hard stop at 3 o'clock, I'll be very brief. I think most of the points have been extremely well covered by Soumya and Jeremy. They've overlapped my presentation exceptionally well, and you can't doubt anything which PwC presents. So that was very well put, and even Jeremy's presentation was excellent. I have just a couple of things to mention. That since Singapore has an issue of land, absolutely floating solar is there to stay. Currently, Singapore's at 350 megawatts, and a step closer to realizing its 2030 ambition of producing at least 2 gigawatts of solar energy by 2030. Opportunities has already been defined: parking lots, drainage canals, roads, buildings, temporary vacant islands, all the water bodies which Singapore has are all opportunities for Singapore to develop floating solar. Corporate PPAs, yes, though not very popular at the moment, but are becoming increasingly popular with a lot of high rise in solar. And as Soumya rightly mentioned, with new technologies coming in, we would see a lot of building material which will absorb solar energy to produce electricity. I think Singapore is one country which I adore, and it needs to go renewable very fast. I do see EV vehicles coming in a very large way. And one of the thoughts which would happen going forward is that neighboring countries like Malaysia and Indonesia would become hubs for the solar batteries to be recharged and then transported within a couple of hours into Singapore. So these are opportunities which the neighboring countries will have, because there is no shortage of land, and land is available cheaper than in Singapore. And with better technologies coming in with companies like Longi, etc., you would see higher efficiency of the solar modules, and therefore less land required for producing solar energy. But I still feel that there would be an opportunity for a lot of producers, a lot of consumers of solar power, especially when the battery technology is fully developed and the costs are significantly lower for these batteries, again, for the sake of repeating, to be charged in Malaysia and Indonesia and move to Singapore to supplement its EV strategy across Singapore, which should happen, in my opinion, pretty fast. There are some other technologies which would also are under development in the next 5 to 7 years. We would see those technologies in solar coming forward, which would be more to do, you could actually have a structure along the roads, trees with modules on top. Of course, solar lighting is already in existence. But as technology and volumes drive costs down, we would see a big opportunity for Singapore to go more into renewables, not only solar, but other areas of renewable. And that is something which I really look forward to. I have been very brief. Thank you very much, Sangeeta, for inviting me in this seminar. I really need to sign off in a couple of minutes. Thank you once again, and to all my distinguished panelists.
Thank you very much for the insight, sir. Thank you. I'll now proceed ahead with launching few polls back to back before I call upon the next speaker.
Okay, thank you very much, Sangeeta. But you make the poll first, I see, no?
Sir, I'm launching the polls first.
Okay, good.
Do you agree floating solar installations will play an integral role in achieving the Asian target of 2025? I'm closing the poll now. So there's a tie between very likely and likely. I'll quickly launch a second poll.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much, Sangeeta. And strike and second poll. Okay.
Do you foresee storage coupled with solar a trend going forward in the Asian region? I'm closing the poll now. 68% of attendees agree with it. One last poll. According to you, a combination of renewable energy sources will lead to a cheaper and secured energy system. I'm closing the poll now. 58% of attendees agree with very likely. With this, I will introduce our next speaker, Mr. Horst Cruz, who is a senior advisor at Africom Cleantech Advisory. He would be talking on trends in Indonesian solar sector, government regulations to stimulate the market. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sangeeta. And so there is no need to introduce myself, respectively, the main topics there, just only an introduction for the auditorium there. According to the request of the organizer, I have not prepared any slides. It's a short presentation covering the three topics. Actually, the potential of renewable energy resources in Indonesia, their governmental goal or target, and at least most essential there, particular regulations of the Ministry of Energy in order to stimulate the market. Yeah, let me start with the first topic, renewable energy potential. I think most of you know that Indonesia has an enormous potential of renewable energies, I would say composed of geothermal, bioenergy, wind, hydro, and solar technology. However, I would say solar technology, despite high solar irradiation values of around 4 kilowatt hours per square meter a day in the western areas, and even up to 6.5 kilowatt hours per square meter a day in the eastern areas of Nusa Tenggara Timur, solar still plays a more than insignificant role in Indonesia. And based on latest statistics I have received here from the state-owned electricity company PT PLN, and also from the Ministry of Energy, total accumulated capacity in Indonesia by April 2020 is basically just 100 megawatts. There are different figures going around. My own assumption is even that it could be a little bit more, but these had been the figures just recently published there. Yeah, to summarize, I would say renewable energy mix in Indonesia currently is about 8 gigawatt in total there. And geothermal and hydro technologies are actually dominating these figures, basically with more than 5 gigawatt in this case. Taking the accumulated renewable energy mix into account of 8 megawatt, this currently represents a percentage of around 13.65%, taking the current installed capacity of PLN, the electricity company here in Indonesia, into account. 13.65%, which is an important figure, taking basically the ambitious goal of the Indonesian government into account, what had already been mentioned by one of my previous speakers there. The Indonesian government's target, very ambitious, foresee a renewable energy mix for 2025 of 23%. And again, I would say in a similar way, hydro and geothermal shall hereby play the major role. Hydro is around 10%. Geothermal share in 2025 shall be around 11%. And other renewables there, bioenergy and solar and, for instance, also tidal energy shall cover just around 2% there. Again, a very, very minor share there. Yeah, I mentioned in previously, I would say the renewable energy mix of around 13.65%. Taking into account the goal of 23%, this means there is still a gap of 9.3%, which needs to be, I would say, achieved within the next 4 to 5 years there. How to reach this? What are the capacity plans, basically, by the Indonesian government there? Because that's also essential for developers, for investors to come to Indonesia or not. Also, according to latest information from the Ministry of Energy, April 2020, there's an additional capacity plan for additional renewable energies 2020 till 2024. Just mention the figures there because they could be even of importance. Hydropower shall be around 4 gigawatt, geothermal around 1 gigawatt, bioenergy around 1.3 gigawatts, wind around 230 megawatt, and solar is around 2.1 gigawatt. Roughly, those figures accumulate to a total capacity of 9 megawatts. However, I would say if you also look to 2025, 23% renewable energy share in 2025 represents a total capacity of renewable energy mix of about 20 gigawatts. 8 gigawatts are existing, status April 2020. To reach 20 gigawatt, this means actually 12 megawatt still needs to be added. The capacity plan, which I just introduced, covered 9 megawatt. This means additional 3 megawatt still needs to be done in order to achieve the governmental goal of 23%. There are different strategies actually existing here in Indonesia in order to reach this goal in 2025. And based on a PLN McKinsey study, I would say additional capacities are here foreseen for solar, in particular on ex-mining land, floating PV, what we just heard there, I would say is particular, I would say most suitable here in Indonesia, particular also as far as all these islands are concerned. But one, I would say, major aspect is also the so-called PV rooftop system, a regulation which I will introduce also later there. PV rooftop is estimated by PLN and McKinsey there to reach within the next 5 years 3.2 gigawatt. This means easily then to achieve the accumulated total target in terms of megawatt, in terms of gigawatt, the 20 gigawatt there. Yeah, if you look then ahead, taking these figures into account, what could we expect for the solar industries, for developers of banks, of expected, I would say, potential for solar within 2020 and 2025? It could be something in the range between 2 to 4, 2 to 6 gigawatt, I would say, what is expected to be awarded and to be installed within the next couple of years in order to reach the target. Yeah, important surely in Indonesia is anyhow to stimulate your capacity, accumulated capacities are very little with just 100 megawatt. And over the past years, I lived meanwhile in Indonesia 10 years, quite a lot of regulations had been published here by the Ministry of Energy in order to create interest and to stimulate the market. However, not many regulations actually prevailed. But I would like now to introduce the most important one, what currently I would say defines the conditions here for solar market activities here in Indonesia. This is on one hand a regulation for utility scale on-grid IPP systems there. This is a regulation number 50, which had been published in 2017 on the utilization of renewable energy sources for electricity supply, with an amendment in 2018 and a recent amendment just this year, very important, in 2020 there. Just what I mentioned, this is covers IPP contracts for a period of 20 or more years, subject to negotiations here with electricity company PLN there. The tariff for the kilowatt hours follows a particular, I would say, way. For that purpose, Indonesia had established a tariff ceiling for renewable energy, which is set by reference to a percentage of PLN costs of generation for the previous year, which is called BPP. This means BPP are the PLN's generation costs of conventional energies. In 2017, when this regulation had been published, the average generation costs all over Indonesia of PLN had been calculated to be 7.39%. And in addition, what had also been calculated are the average generation costs in each of the provinces in Indonesia. In 2017, the BPP, the electricity generation cost, ranged from, in US dollar cents, from 6.51 for locations Java and Barat, most coal power stations, that's why it's very, very low, up to 17.5 US dollar cents in Nusa Tenggara Timur. This is basically the eastern part of Indonesia there, where in most cases still diesel generators are operating there, where it's expensive to transport coal and also other fuel there. But how to calculate really the tariff? The tariff is basically calculated as follows: by a comparison of the national average BPP, average generation costs, with the average costs in each province where you intend as a developer to install a solar system. Yeah. So in provinces where now the generation costs are higher than the national average BPP, the tariff is maximum 85% of the local BPP in the particular province. In provinces where the BPP actually is lower than average, for instance here in Java, then the tariff needs to be negotiated individually with PLN. However, even in that case you have agreed on a particular tariff, this tariff is finally still subject to agreement of the Ministry of Energy. A very important change of this regulation took just place beginning of this year, because so far over the past 3 years, not so much interest had been found in actually implementing solar systems based on this regulation in view of the BOOT scheme, build, operate, own, and transfer. This means you had been required on the original regulation to hand over the system after 20 or 25 years to PLN. This had been changed in February this year from BOOT to BOO, and also previous power purchase agreements can be amended accordingly. A very, very important step forward, I would say, to create more interest there. Yeah, just only very, very briefly to give some information about the tender process here in Indonesia there. I would say, with the exception of geothermal and waste to energy projects, all renewable energy projects must be procured by PLN through a direct selection process, which is a limited tender process involving at least 2 bidders from a pre-qualification list. During the pre-qualification phase, developers are invited to join a list of selectors provided, and this list is then valid for 3 years. Finally, winner of a bid of tender processes is the company with the lowest tariff offered, based on this calculation I introduced beforehand, but however, finally also to the approval of the Ministry of Energy there. Yeah. Let me come to the second regulation, which is still quite new. This is the regulation 49 of 2018 for rooftop systems, basically for industrial, but also for private applications there. And this regulation basically regulates the development, ownership, and operation of on-grid solar generation facilities on rooftops. PLN customers are herewith permitted to install and operate solar systems on their roofs and sell the excess power generated to PLN on the basis of a net metering scheme. However, previously, the received electricity from PLN customers could be offset against the electricity that PLN transmits to such customers on a one-by-one offset principle. This is not more valid. Under the regulation 49, any electricity by solar systems which is exported to the PLN net will only be priced at 65%. This means you basically lose 35% in comparison to the previous regulation. There's a multiplier factor there, and you actually lose then around 35% of produced renewable energy by solar there. In case the exported electricity you produce in each month is greater than the imported electricity in the ongoing months, the excess will be accumulated and counted as deduction of electricity bill for the following months. A second, I would say, part of this regulation, which really created, I would say, not much interest really to install rooftop systems based on this regulation, had been a so-called monthly capacity charge, what should cover operational charges of PLN. For each type of power plant, coal, geothermal, diesel, whatever there, capacity charge is existing there, which is the total net power capacity of your plant, or for solar systems, the total capacity of your inverters, multiplied by 40 hours operation, multiplied by the applicable electricity tariff. You can imagine 40 hours solar, yeah, and take into account, for instance, in solar irradiation per day of 4 kilowatt hours per square meter and day, 4 kilowatt hours or 40 hours divided then by 4 hours, this is 10. This means you lose actually 10 days generation costs if you really have to pay this capacity charge of 40 hours. Luckily, this has been changed by an amendment by end of last year. The Ministry of Energy reduced the capacity charge solely for solar plants from 40 hours to 5 hours, which basically represents 1 full day. In that case, you really can enjoy this high irradiation of 5 kilowatt hours here per day. Very attractive now for industrial and also for private users. Yeah. Last but not least, what is very important, I would say, whether you actually intend to undertake rooftop systems or utility grade systems, you have to obey the regulations for the local content. This is also clearly stipulated in the regulation for rooftop. And for solar, this means that basically around 34% of the goods must come from Indonesia. Services 100%, and combined goods and services, this is around 41%, which is required if you intend really to execute projects here in Indonesia. Apart from this, surely like in all other countries, you need permits, you need licenses, and frankly saying, despite some easement, is still a quite complicated and lengthy process. Take your time to settle this, that you really can successful solar systems in Indonesia. Yeah, so far some brief about capacities, potential of energy, also regular. And in case there are any questions, please let me know. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the insight, sir. Now proceeding ahead, we have our next speaker, Mr. Harsh Das, who is the Business Development Lead in Southeast Asia from CleanMax. He would be talking on rise and growth of corporate PPAs in Thailand's solar sector. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for inviting me to this session. And also thanks for all the panelists. I think a lot of key insights, a lot of very valid points on various different countries. I would like to focus on one segment of it, which is how corporates can really drive the adoption and growth of solar, because apart from the government, I think corporates are the key driver of this adoption. And before I begin on the discussion, I would just quickly like to introduce about CleanMax to give you a context of what we do and where we're coming from. So CleanMax is a B2B solar developer. We are the largest in Asia, having installed over 600 watts in this model. Every single solar plant we have developed is for a corporate customer. We only work with them. That's why we understand how they view it and how they adopt the systems. So my agenda today was to discuss about corporate PPA adoption in Thailand and how it has started and how it is growing and what are the next steps in the future for this. So to start, before we start about the future, we have to give a context of the past to understand what has happened so far and why this adoption has started recently. Because if you compare the neighboring countries, let's say Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, the corporate PPA adoption is very, very small compared to Thailand. Thailand would be maybe 90% of the corporate PPA adoption compared to all of these countries, right? So Thailand started its solar journey, I would say something around 2010. Back then, there was a lot of FIT adder schemes, similar to what's going on in Vietnam right now. And there were various schemes over the period, and over a period of 6-7 years, there was roughly 3,000 megawatts or so done in this process. A majority of that, I would say 90 to 95% would be on the large farms, and some of them would be on rooftop also, where the power is fed and consumed by the government. And there's a very lucrative tariff for that. The tariff used to be much higher than the grid tariff itself. Hence, it was a very lucrative scheme. But since 2016, the government has stopped the scheme. It was basically a subsidy, and the government realizes that now solar is cheap enough that without subsidies, also developers, consumers can get the benefit of the system. So since 2016, this process stopped. So the only way to adopt solar for corporates here is either to invest themselves, which is called an EPC scheme, where you invest on a system, you install a system on your roof, or you go ahead with the PPA scheme, where someone like CleanMax invests and installs the system and operates it for you for long term. In 2016-17, there were some government regulations also which further supported this. Unlike in India, where electricity is deregulated since 2003, in Thailand it is a regulated business, so you need to get a license for this. The government made it easier to get license for small rooftop systems, and since then there has been a steady rise in the solar PPA industry. Now coming to where we are right now in the PPA market in Thailand, right? So far, I think roughly 100 megawatt or so would have been executed in this model, but it's going to expand really fast. I think in the next year or so, the capacity should double, and after that, maybe it will keep doubling every year or so. To focus on why it is growing in Thailand, let's say if you compare Malaysia, Indonesia, why is it not growing there and why is it growing here? So a few key points comes to my mind. So one is the commercials. The basic fundamental commercials for solar is much better in Thailand compared to other countries. What I mean by that is the grid tariff, which a consumer buys the power from the government. In Indonesia is almost half of Thailand. In Malaysia, it's almost 30-40% lower than Thailand, and so on. So the cost of power is very high in Thailand. So if a consumer buys power from a PPA or invests themselves on the solar, they have a lot more savings to have from the solar system. Second is Thailand has a very large industrial base. There are a lot of manufacturing industries, and these manufacturing industries have the kind of roof required and the kind of consumption required to really adopt solar. And also there have been some policy changes, not to the not as much as we would hope for, but still there have been some positive changes which are really driving it. For example, the generation licenses are being provided these days. There's a government body called BOI, which gives incentives for solar investments and so on. So these are a few factors which are really driving the PPA growth and adoption in Thailand. These days, considering COVID, I would believe there is a further push for solar adoption, specifically the PPA side, because right now, as COVID has impacted all industries, everyone's main agenda has become how to survive and how to adapt, right? And one of the key focuses has been cost saving. And solar gives a very easy way to adopt cost saving and also meet your green requirements. Previously, customers could either invest or could do a PPA to achieve this. But right now, most of the companies would rather not invest in a non-core business and rather save their money and invest in their own business. Hence, the PPA adoptions are rising more and more. It is not uncommon in Thailand to hear of a 10 megawatt or a higher tender process run by a corporate who wants to go like solar in a big way. So these are becoming common occurrences here. And today, Thailand solar industry is where I would say India was, let's say, 4 to 5 years back. And there are a lot of new developers, both local and international like ourselves, who are entering the business. And over the next 2-3 years, I think the developers will get filtered out, and the best will remain in the market. So I think we have very less time, so I will just quickly wrap it up. So in terms of what are the changes and what are the trends we see in the near future, which will further help in the solar adoption. So one of that, I think someone pointed out before, was funding for these solar projects. Typically, fundings for rooftop projects are a challenge because of the scale of the system. When it is a large solar farm, 50 megawatt, 100 megawatt farms, it's easier to get funding for that. Whereas a typical solar plant, rooftop solar plant, may be just 1 megawatt, which makes it very tough to get funding for. And the local banks are not very comfortable right now to lend for these solar projects. They expect a larger scale of 20, 30 megawatts or higher. But today, because the industry is still nascent, not many developers have that scale to be able to get the funds from local banks. So a lot of developers like CleanMax ourselves, we have recently, just last week, finalized a $10 million loan from one of the European funds to support our Thailand projects. Other developers are finding similar solutions, taking international loans, taking corporate loans from their parent company, and so on. But hopefully in the future, in the next 2-3 years, the industry will grow to a phase where the funding situation will become better and fundings will be available locally. The second changes which everyone is expecting in the industry is, so today there are a lot of government permits and regulations in Thailand to adopt solar. To just install 1 megawatt of system, it takes 4 to 5 months of permitting processes where we have to take, I think, 6 to 7 licenses. And only after that, you can start the construction of a project. As you can see, this is a very time-consuming process and is slowing down the growth of solar adoption. But the ERC has been pushing to streamline the process, make it a one-stop solution where it can be streamlined in half the time or so. Hopefully, these changes should come in the next year or so, which will further push for solar adoption. Another change, another regulation change which we are expecting is net metering. Thailand doesn't have net metering scheme, which means any excess power generated by a solar plant cannot be fed to the grid or taken benefit from. So as a result, many companies who don't have much production on Sundays or Saturdays, who tend to lose solar on those days. But if this kind of net metering scheme is available, I think which is available in many other neighboring countries like Malaysia, like Singapore, like India, and so on. If this scheme is implemented in Thailand, it will further boost the adoption of solar. And lastly, as a future, as a long-term target, I think open access or wheeling of solar will also become a possibility in Thailand, which is not possible today. And that can really push the adoption, because a rooftop solar can only provide, let's say, 10 to 20% of a power requirement for a large consumer, whereas an open access or a wheeling system can provide up to 80-90% of the power. And that really transforms the solar industry from the corporate side in a country. So these are the changes which I would like to see in Thailand in the near future, and which will really promote the growth of solar industry and adoption from the corporate side.
Thank you very much for the insight, sir. Now I will hand over the session to Ms. Sonia for Q&A. I request all the speakers to kindly switch on their cameras and unmute themselves.
Hi, thanks, Sangeeta. And thanks, Harsh, for this absolutely insightful presentation. And thanks to all the other speakers as well, Jeremy, as well as Horst and Chris and Devin. We've been receiving a lot of questions, however, we're short of time. So I'm going to ask maybe one question per panelist, and I would request for all the panelists to keep the responses brief. Maybe I'll quickly start with Harsh.
Sure.
Harsh, what do you think? You spoke a lot about Thailand, but what do you think the scenario will be for rooftop solar market in the next 2 to 5 years in ASEAN region?
I think overall, there's a lot of potential in ASEAN region, especially considering the industrial countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines. These industrial countries have a large potential to adopt solar. And primarily, there are two key drivers for this. One is the basic commercials. In future, the local grid prices will go up. And also, with the advancement of solar technologies, the prices of solar will come down. This provides a complementary situation where the value proposition of solar makes more and more sense for customers. That's one. Second is new government policies are coming up. As one of the panelists mentioned, in Indonesia, they are also opening up corporate PPAs. It's also opening up in various other countries. So these policy changes are also opening up, which will also further push. Today, Thailand seems to be one of the best places, but other countries are also catching up. And we believe in the next 2 to 5 years, a lot of these countries will have a significant push from the corporates to adopt solar.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It's definitely the way to go. Thanks for your response on that. Maybe the next question to Horst. Horst, we've talked about the renewable energy transition. And renewable energy transition basically would mean that there's more renewable energy and less of other forms of energy. In Indonesia in particular, how do you see solar PV driving away coal exit or driving the coal exit?
Yeah, just what I mentioned there, you basically, I would say, see the current situation that solar really does not play any major role. Reasons had been really there, not satisfying regulations there. But on the other hand, if you see in particular, I would say the private market there, it's very, very difficult to find suitable investment finance via local banks. Local banks are really reluctant to finance solar projects because they do not have any technical capability. They only hear, I would say, in the news, this system that didn't work properly and problems here and problems there. This means they're very, very reluctant, even today, I would say, to finance solar systems in Indonesia. And I would say substantial, I would say, support in form of regulations perhaps is really required to enable also local banks to finance solar systems also for the private sector. On the other hand, you remember the figures what I also have introduced, I would say, Indonesia has a very, very high potential of solar. If I compare this with my own country in Germany, it's more than double as high. This means you can actually produce here electricity based on solar at a very, very favorable price if the conditions fit. And this is the main issue. Conditions must fit to create interest of developers, bankers, and investors.
Yeah.
But I'm positive the developer will come. I said I'm living 10 years in Indonesia. If you see the development now, I think we are on a positive trend that solar will also play a major role, at least regarding those figures, which I mentioned, something between 2 and 5 gigawatts in the next 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, and the regulatory support towards that will only help give more wind to that target. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks for your response, Horst. Maybe the next question is more for Chris. Chris, we see players in the industry are moving to larger wafers like M10 and M12. Why do you at LONGi think that M10 is the right size?
So as I just mentioned that there's a discussion in the industry, is that the bigger the better? Our answer is not, because this M10 wafer is designed under more overall consideration, including all the related work, not only the module, maybe from the supply chain, we consider the glass size, the limitation from the glass capacity, glass size. We consider the container. We consider the shipment. Also, we have the consideration of inverter and the tracker. So this decision is made under a very comprehensive consideration, including all the related industry. And besides, we also do not want to change the original design of the module itself. We try to not make very big change. I think the big change on the module design itself might cause some reliability risk in the future. So I think it's an overall decision, and not only by LONGi, by most of the big players in this industry. So M10 is going to happen in very near future, and we can expect LONGi and other players will have more than 40 gigawatt capacity for M10 wafer and M10 module in next year.
Okay, thank you for sharing your technical insights there. Maybe the last question, Jeremy, should I say saving the best question for the last? We talk about solar a lot, but hey, when sun doesn't shine, what do we do about it? How do you think, when do you think energy storage will become commonplace for renewable energy projects in Asia and help firm the intermittent?
Yeah. So I think that's a really good question, where we see a lot of discussions already on storage for the last couple of years, since the time I've been involved with storage projects since 2014. I think it's going to go in a similar trend where costs for storage will drop drastically, and a lot of it is actually driven not by solar specifics, by the EV market, and the technologies are definitely improving. We are now seeing prices between just over $100 per watt, and I think in Southeast Asia there's already a lot of initial pilot projects that have gone ahead from various government agencies, utilities, and they are really keen and interested. So I think the real challenge is not so much of the technology. I think pricing is already nearly there. There's the real challenge is the regulation part and paying for the services that would be. And that's what I've seen in markets like the Philippines, markets like Korea and Japan and Australia. They're mature, and that's already been well established. So until you're able to to make payments for, especially when I say speaking on the grid side, on distribution or transmission networks, but for solar or even wind projects where you want to have storage to help smoothen out frequency regulation, voltage regulation, maybe there's always a commercial aspect where investors may not want to add additional costs to make it make their investments more profitable. Like in Japan, we are seeing that in some of the projects, even though there's some issues where there is a need for it, but it may not make commercial sense then yet. So I think these are the two main parts of it. One is regulation, one is the market that allows for it to be done. But I would definitely say that the technology is already there and the costs are already reaching very competitive prices to make that happen, make it commercially viable. Yeah.
Thanks, Jeremy. Maybe just one more question before we close. And Jeremy, I think this one's for you as well. For the same project size, how much more expensive is floating solar over ground-mounted solar? And what benefits justify this cost differential?
Okay, so I think it's a good, but it's also a very common question, and however, it needs to be taken into context and not taken it as kind of okay, this is the guide, and it's going to be the same. What we've seen of late, where we have very large showcase projects in the region in Thailand, Singapore, Indonesia, Vietnam, Taiwan, where it's more than 50 megawatt projects. What we can see is that the costs are very comparable to large utility ground mount projects already. Okay, that's true. However, on the smaller projects, I still think there is a premium for floating PV in terms of cost. So I would say it needs to be taken into context, also in the fact that a big chunk of it will be the type of anchoring and mooring, the type of site conditions where you may have to tackle the elements more stringently. For example, a project in Japan or in Taiwan where you have typhoons and very strong winds, you have to be able to have better and more stable anchoring and mooring solutions, which will be different from, say, a project in Singapore, where you don't have the sort of strong winds and complex conditions under your reservoir. So take these things into consideration and in context from your particular project that you're going to have to understand the cost. So it's coming close to be competitive to comparable, but it depends on your project that you're looking at ultimately on the site. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeremy, for helping understand the nuances there.
Okay.
Again, I would like to thank all the panelists and for the very insightful session today. And over to you, Sangeeta.
I would once again like to thank all the key panelists, all the attendees for joining us for today's webinar. Thank you so much. And with this positive note, we would end the webinar for today. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
See you.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.